You know, it's been a while since I can honestly say I've had my head in the game. Last season got off to a promising start, but then it all fell apart. I ended up not being in a great headspace. I made questionable decisions that derailed my entire season. I even fell behind on uploads and couldn't even finish the season with that. I was stressed, and it all just got to me and weighed me down. That might be why I found myself needing to come all the way out here, following my heart to answer a call that rings through my very soul. Being out here, hiking through the woods, it's helped a lot to clear my head and get me back on the right path. It almost feels like magic. Magic. That's the true reason I'm out here in these woods. You see, there's a very special magic that's etched itself deep into my very soul. Magic from an entire world that thrives on it. A world where I'm free to be me. It's a world I haven't visited in a very long time. But it's a world I need to travel to, now more than ever. Maybe, after spending some time there, I'll truly feel at peace with where I was at, and be ready to face the world again. Maybe I'll even be able to bring a little bit of that magic back with me. Who knows? Well, one thing I do know is this. I trust my heart to lead me to the door where I'll find that world etched into my very being. And thankfully, I have the key to see the realm that lies beyond it. What's up guys, Ruppy here, welcoming you to my draft analysis for Season 6 of the UNPL, the Ulanderlanha Pokemon League. In case you aren't familiar with draft format for Pokemon, let me break it down for you quick. It's kind of similar to fantasy sports, where coaches take turns drafting Pokemon to fill out their rosters, then bring what they feel are the best 6 to battle against other coaches from week to week until we ultimately crown a champion. For this season, the UNPL has decided to do something quite different compared to previous seasons. One of the first changes is that each coach was given 125 points to draft anywhere between 10 to 12 Mons for our rosters. A bit of a bump up from last season. This is because we decided to do a little something called low-tier Ubers. As in, Mons that are normally considered Ubers and are normally excluded from draft because of that very reason, but we only allowed in the ones that are considered the least powerful threats by normal Uber standards. Kind of the Uber's Yu-Yu, I guess, to some degree. So you're not going to see things like Mewtwo, but you are going to see things like Fluttermane, Qianpao, Lugia, etc. For the sake of fairness, each team was only allowed to draft one Uber, that being 22 to 24 points, if they wished to do so. To further spice up the season, where we did low-tier Terra Captains last season, this season we're doing high-tier Terra Captains. Each team was given a Terra budget of 25 points, and most Mons at 17 points and lower, with some notable exceptions, could be picked as a Terra Captain. To balance this, however, every eligible Mon also carried a Terra Tax, which is basically a separate point value to compensate for most Mons that are usually considered a bit overpowered with Terra being allowed to do so. For example, if I drafted Manaphy, that would be 17 points. But if I decide to declare it a Terra Captain, then it would instead be worth 20 points from both my Terra and overall draft budget. Long story short, we wanted to play with fire and see what kind of potentially busted teams we could have for what should be a very interesting season. Now, it's no secret at this point, especially since I did an update video to kind of explain things a little while back, that last season for the UNPL completely fell apart on me in more ways than one. This season, I'm hoping to really bounce back strong, and if my little intro skit didn't help make that clear, I've got a team theme concept that I'm hopeful will pave the way to do just that. So, why don't we use a little magic to transport ourselves to the demon realm, and I can discuss my draft in more Owl House terms. That's right! I decided to dive back into probably my most prominent hyperfixation in years to help guide my hand in draft this season. And I can't wait to introduce the squad I drafted to fill these roles to you. I'll say this though. Being given the 13th pick in the draft order out of 16 teams did not seem like a promising start, as I correctly assumed a lot of the better low-tier Ubers would be gone almost immediately. I was not deterred, however, because there was actually a mon I was looking to get that wasn't an Uber for my first pick. And the allure of the available Ubers proved too strong for many to ignore and allowed me a chance to right probably one of the biggest wrongs of my run last season. By some miracle of the Titan himself, I was able to make my first pick for the second season in a row, Dragapult, who will play the role of the Golden Guard, aka Hunter, in my little Owl House team. I was not shy in my draft analysis last season about how badly I finally wanted to give Dragapult a try in draft, and never got lucky enough to do so until then. And being talked into giving it up as part of the mass transaction chaos that went down last season is arguably the biggest regret of my entire draft career. So, I was determined to make amends with the Ghostly Dragon and give it a proper shot to make up for it. Even in a draft where quite a few Ubers will be running around, Dragapult is still a significant threat in my personal opinion. And how could it not be? Base 142 speed actually puts a lot of those available Ubermons to shame. Its offensive stats allow it to easily run physical, special, or even mixed sets. It can pivot, it can set screens, it can spread status, it can spin block. I said it before, and I'll say it again. Dragapult may be arguably the single most versatile mon in draft format today, and I owe it to this fantastic Ghost Dragon to make amends for last season and prove myself a worthy wielder of its deep skill set. For my second pick, I shifted my attention away from the Ubers again, and I guess I'll say this now. I decided to hold off on grabbing my Uber for quite a while in this draft. It didn't take me long to figure out which one I wanted from what was left after the first round, but very few people could snipe me on it because of the one per team rule, and I wanted to make sure I had the pieces to help my choice shine before those pieces went off the board. That's why I opted to start putting together my Fairy Dragon Steel Core for this draft with a mon that synergizes extremely well with Dragapult. So let's welcome to the Columbus Swoo roster, Primarina, aka Scara. Being a water fairy type allows Primarina and Dragapult to perfectly cover almost all of one another's weaknesses. And there's no denying the special powerhouse that Primarina is. Base 126 special attack along with abilities such as Torrent and Liquid Voice make this mon extremely hard to switch into. And base 116 special defense makes it a fantastic special wall as well that can eat hits and slowly grind down teams over time. Having access to Flip Turn now also gives me a slower pivot, which gives me options for generating momentum and putting pieces into place to pull off a win. For my third pick, I decided to start working on my Fire Water Grass Core for this roster. I already had the Water type in Primarina, and after seeing what was available, a devious little scheme began to form in my mind. Who better to help Primarina be an even bigger menace to take down than the returning Willow, who this time is represented by Rillaboom. Rillaboom is powerful. There's no denying that. Base 125 attack means this mon hits like a truck. And 190-70 is a great bulk distribution that makes it hard to wear down. Especially when you factor in its Grassy Surge ability to allow for passive recovery via terrain. Anyone who's watched me since the Gen 8 draft days will know what I'm capable of with Rillaboom. and despite Grassy Glide getting nerfed in power this gen, it's still incredible priority, and Rillaboom will make sure it still hurts. Also, you can never go wrong with another U-turner for more pivoting problems I can create. Now, if you remember that old roster of mine from BBR Season 2, as much as I know everyone's sick of me bringing it up now, then you might know what my next pick is. I couldn't pass up the opportunity, especially with Dragapult and Primarina on the roster already, to resurrect one of the nastiest combos out there. For my fourth pick, I drafted Hawlucha, who will play the role of everyone's favorite Good Witch main protagonist from the Owl House, Luce. I don't think Hawlucha in terrain needs any introduction, as Grassy Seed with Unburden quickly makes this thing difficult to both outrun and take down. Its stats may not look like much, barring that base 118 speed, but base 92 attack can still prove difficult to stop, especially if this crafty bird gets some boosts under its belt. In addition to also being able to U-turn, Hawlucha also has two other great abilities in Mold Breaker to ignore opposing abilities, and Limber to avoid being paralyzed, in case I decide I don't want to pull terrain Unburden shenanigans. As if Luce the Hawlucha wasn't potentially strong enough already, I ultimately opted to make her my first Terra Captain as well. I went back and forth all draft on whether I wanted Hawlucha or Primarina to be my higher tier Terra Captain choice, and drafted while keeping their respective Terra taxes in mind. But once I finished my draft, ultimately I felt Hawlucha both benefited from it more, and opened me up to some more Terra options on the lower end of the board. My magical mayhem doesn't end here, however, because I had a few more pieces I was scheming to further bolster this roster. After all, I've got tons of pivoting and some priority, but how do you make mons like Dragapult and Hawlucha even harder to stop? You take away the ability to outrun them. And no one is better at making sure of that than Galvantula, who is represented by the devious little gremlin, Kikimora. One thing Galvantula is extremely good at is getting sticky webs up, because base 108 speed is a great speed tier to make sure this little spider does its job, and being able to Volt Switch out after the fact quickly allows me to respond to whatever my opponents decide to do from there. Base 97 special attack is definitely usable, especially since having Compound Eyes means Galvantula is more likely to hit Thunders without needing Rain to do some big damage quickly. Galvantula may not be the sturdiest mon out there, but with this team so far, I don't need it to be, because it does everything I could ever want it to by taking away the ability to run Scarf or Booster Energy as a guarantee to outrun my fastest threats. At this point, I decided to finish my Firewater Grass Core by grabbing a Fire type, and believe it or not, I actually had the perfect one in mind. It's not one you typically see run in draft too much anymore, and I can understand why. But I think I've got the pieces around it to help it both thrive and be an absolute nuisance. For my sixth pick, I drafted Amity the Salazzle, because Luce needs her sweet potato, and my team needs this Abominations prodigy. Salazzle may be the textbook definition of a glass cannon, but this thing can still be a problem if I play my cards right. And having grassy terrain to address that 4x weakness to ground certainly helps. Base 117 speed is tough to outrun, especially with Galvantula's webs in the mix, and base 111 special attack certainly works for throwing out fire and poison stab attacks that will leave a dent. Salazzle also gives me that ever-crucial grounded poison to address toxic spikes, which can also spread of its own accord if I choose to do so. Especially given this thing's great speed. Being fully transparent, one other reason I really wanted to run Salazzle again, as I haven't done so since I believe IBL Season 7 back in the Gen 8 days, ironically enough Galvantula was also on that same roster, was for its corrosion ability, which allows me to freely toxic anything in front of me without fear. And I do mean anything. I don't believe anyone ended up drafting it, but needless to say, I didn't want to find myself getting walled by something like Terra Poison Diplin again. That's not to say Oblivious isn't a bad second ability, though, considering it means Salazzle can't be taunted, so it can cause chaos however it pleases. For my 7th pick, I decided to try something that, much like Dragapult, I've been interested in trying in draft for some time, and I think works very well with the plan I've been putting together thus far. After all, I wanted something to finally address Dragapult's ghost weakness, and I felt it was time to slow things down after grabbing so many fast things. That's why I rounded out the Hex Squad by grabbing Gus in the form of a creature so terrifying and freaky, it was actually banished from the Demon Realm entirely. Farigiraf. Base 60 speed ties it with Primarina as my slowest pick up to this point, but Farigiraf is deceptively dangerous. Being normal psychic means it doesn't carry a ghost weakness, having Sap Sipper as one of its abilities adds to my ever-growing list of grass resists. Cudchew gives me an excuse to run berries more to keep this mon ticking, and Armor Tail shuts down any thoughts of trying to throw priority at me. Couple that with base 120 HP, base 110 special attack, and a very usable base 90 attack as well, and Farigiraf becomes a sleeper pick that could fill a lot of roles for me, similar to Dragapult. I could also play with a plethora of setup options, I can set screens with this mon as well, I have a very viable Trick Room threat to address any thoughts of using that against my otherwise very fast team. There's a lot to love about Farigiraf, and I can't wait to finally give this mon a try for myself. It was at this point in the draft that I finally decided to lock in my Ubers pick. There were only 3 coaches at this point, counting myself, who didn't have one, and I had some concerns about one of them potentially sniping me, as it looked like what I was looking at might work for their team too. So I chose to grab it now so I didn't have to stress about putting together this plan for nothing. For my 8th pick, I drafted Zamazenta-Crowned, who will be filling the role of everyone's favorite young titan, King. Now, I know what you're thinking. Zamazenta-Crowned? That's the Uber you were kind of building towards? Truth be told, it looked like the best option left based on what was still on the board, and I honestly think I've solved the puzzle when it comes to this mon. Yes, Zamazenta-Crowned does have the drawback of being required to hold the Rusted Shield item, which definitely hurts a mon with the bulk this thing has. Base 92 HP and base 140 on both defenses is definitely something that should benefit from passive healing. But with Rillaboom's terrain, I've solved both that problem and its ground weakness for being a fighting steel type. With Webs from Galvantula, its base 128 speed gets even harder to outrun since I can't try to counter with a Scarf of my own, and a lot of its weaknesses are actually very well compensated for in the other members of my roster thus far. Obviously I can pull Iron Defense body press shenanigans, but a base 120 attack stat is also very usable from this beast, and given the plethora of other threats I have to overwhelm opponents so far, I think Zamazenta-Crowned could actually have the chance to shine and show what it's capable of. Pokemon is a team game after all, and sometimes a mon is only as good as the team around it. A theory I hope to put into practice with Zamazenta-Crowned. At this point in the draft, especially considering I just spent a hefty chunk of points on my Uber, I only had about 11 points left. At least according to my plan, as of declaring Holucha my Terra Captain because of the Terra attacks. I knew I'd have to look low tier to help round this team out, so I decided to just go ahead and grab arguably the best 1-point mon there is. Trapinch. Yeah, Trapinch doesn't look like much given its extremely low speed and the otherwise garbage stats it has, since it is the first stage evolution for the Flygon line. And yet, it has a base 100 attack and access to First Impression. And if you've seen what my good friend Kyle A has done with this mon in BBL this past season, you know that this little monster is criminally underrated and rightfully feared for the underlying power it possesses. For that reason, I felt it only right to dub this mon Hootie, after the birdworm that guards and is the Owl House itself, and is constantly underestimated for being, well, himself. Next, I wanted to consider picking up what would probably become my second and final Terra Captain for this roster. And I realized I was still missing a few things. Another fair resist, since Zamazenta-Crowned fighting steel doesn't give me that. A more reliable rock setter than Trap Inch. No offense to the little guy. As well as the ability to spin, so I wouldn't have to consider using Holucha to defog as my only means of removing hazards if I needed to do so. I also wanted a rock type to try and patch up a few holes I still had as far as weaknesses were concerned. Namely a flying weakness that I still had no answer to for my Rillaboom Holucha combo. Coincidentally, there was a monster on the board that fit everything I was looking for, and happens to be quite a good Terra Captain. Which is why I grabbed Colossal next. Nicknamed Bellows because it felt the most fitting, especially I guess to play with the idea of Bellows and Loose being my Terra Captains as the only two characters in the show to, in one form or another, harness the Titan's power for themselves. Colossal provides me with both rocks and spikes as well as rapid spin, and having base 80 for both of its offensive stats means I can run this thing physical or special to keep my opponents on their toes. 110, 120, 90 is also a fantastic bulk distribution, and while it only has base 30 speed, I can easily fix that with moves like Rock Polish, or utilize its Steam Engine ability to quickly jump to +6 speed as long as I survive a fire or water hit, which Terra makes significantly easier. Flame Body and Flash Fire are also both incredible abilities from Mon with Colossal's bulk along with Terra, so I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of problems this Mon can create. With only 2 points left, I decided I might as well use them. And an idea got suggested to me that kinda works considering I'm already setting out to prove Zamazenta-Crowned as an underrated threat with the right team around it. So, for my final pick, I decided to draft Slacking, who will fill the role of the Owl Lady herself, Ida. I know Slacking doesn't seem like much considering its Truant ability means it can only move every other turn, but because of that, people seem to forget that this thing has a base 100 speed, quite a lot of bulk, more on the physical side, and a monstrous base 160 attack that can easily allow it to break teams who don't account for it wide open for the other threats they might actually be worried about. Slacking has a ton of options at its disposal to make the most of the few turns it can actually do anything to completely turn an opponent's game plan on its head by ripping apart their most valuable pieces. And you know Ida would have no trouble setting up the rest of these magical misfits for glory. After all, us weirdos have to stick together. So, that is my roster for Season 6 of the UNPL. It's not a perfect roster by any means, but I'm honestly really happy with how it turned out, and I'm looking forward to being able to play with a lot of these Mons and seeing what I can do with them. Especially running a team theme that means so much to me, and has always helped pull me back from the darkness. Will we have enough magic to fuel a turnaround from last season's disastrous collapse? Only time will tell. All of that said, I have been Ruppy. Thank you so much for watching, and please make sure you check out the draft analysis videos from all the other UNPL coaches this season and show them some love. And I will see you guys next time. Take care.